7:42 in the morning, east of the Kursk border. Fog hangs low over black soil fields, broken by ditches and narrow farm lanes. Visibility is short. Sound travels badly. Every movement leaves a signature. Somewhere inside that fog, a Ukrainian Challenger 2 moves forward at walking speed. 60 tons of steel, heat, and human breath advancing through terrain that was never meant for armor. Inside the turret, thermal screens cut through the mist. Outside, Russian drones are already listening. In this kind of battlefield, weight is no longer protection. Distance is no longer safety. Anything that can be seen can be tracked. Anything tracked can be hunted. So the question is not how powerful a tank is. The question is how long it can stay alive, and what it takes to leave. The first real fight begins long before the first shot, because on a modern battlefield, detection decides who lives long enough to fire back. Near the eastern border, the Challenger 2 moves through fog and broken farmland where sightlines are short and mistakes are permanent. The ground is cut by drainage ditches and low hedges, forcing the tank to advance slowly, using terrain that hides its mass but also limits escape options. In these conditions, the crew does not search with their eyes alone. They rely on thermal optics, scanning for heat while keeping the hull masked behind folds of earth, because exposure, even for seconds, can trigger a chain reaction that no armor can fully stop. Thermal imaging changes how contact begins, because heat ignores camouflage, paint, and good intentions. Through the fog, the Challenger's sensors pick up shapes that do not belong to the field. Engines hold warmth. Metal keeps memory. What looks like quiet terrain to the naked eye appears crowded through infrared, revealing a Russian grouping that believes it is hidden. At least 2 BMP sit forward, angled to cover approaches, while farther back a tank rests hull down, exposing little more than its turret face. Based on size, profile, and heat signature, the crew identifies it as a likely T-72 or possibly a T-90M, positioned to support infantry rather than maneuver independently. This placement reflects a shallow defensive posture that carries real costs under modern sensors. Shallow positions rely on concealment more than depth, assuming that terrain and limited visibility will delay detection. That assumption no longer holds. Thermal optics collapse distance, and once heat is seen, reaction time shrinks fast. Studies from recent fighting in Ukraine show that the window between detection and first strike can fall below 30 seconds when hunter-killer systems are used correctly, leaving little room for correction or withdrawal. Armor thickness cannot compensate for a late decision, because the first hit often decides the rhythm of everything that follows. The Challenger's hunter-killer setup matters here, because it removes delay from the kill chain. While the gunner tracks one target, the commander searches for the next, handing off priority without breaking focus. This parallel process compresses decision time and turns detection into action before the enemy understands what has changed. In simple terms, one set of eyes is already moving forward while the other finishes the shot, and that overlap saves seconds that cannot be recovered once incoming fire begins. The first round leaves the barrel with no warning beyond recoil, and the effect is immediate. A forward BMP erupts in thermal bloom as its interior temperature spikes, the shape collapsing into a bright mass that no longer resembles a vehicle. A second target is engaged almost at once, struck before its crew can dismount or reverse, proving how quickly exposed armor becomes vulnerable once spotted. The Russian tank behind them remains partially concealed, but its position is now known, and knowledge is a weapon that travels faster than steel. What makes this exchange decisive is not aggression, but timing. Early detection allows the Challenger to fire from a position of control, choosing targets that cannot respond in kind. Shallow defenses amplify this vulnerability, because once the forward layer is breached, the rear has no warning buffer. Modern sensors punish formations that rely on being unseen, and the price is paid in seconds, not minutes. Yet this advantage is fragile because the act of firing announces presence to everyone else on the field. Muzzle blast, thermal flare, and movement all signal that a high-value target is active, and adversaries do not ignore such signals for long. The Challenger gains initiative through vision, but it also spends concealment the moment it pulls the trigger. But once the first shots are fired, concealment is gone, and the battlefield changes its rules. Once the Challenger 2 fires, the battle enters a new phase, because visibility now runs both ways and priority shifts in seconds. The tank has revealed its position, and on a modern battlefield that signal travels faster than radio. To Russian observers, this is no longer just armor on the field. It is a high-value target, rare, dangerous, and worth immediate attention. Western tanks carry not only firepower, but symbolism, and that alone is enough to draw concentrated response once they are confirmed. The Russian reaction follows a familiar pattern built around speed and volume rather than precision. Mortars begin to bracket the area, walking impacts closer with each adjustment, while artillery farther back adds pressure by saturating likely escape routes. This fire is not meant to score a clean hit at first. Its purpose is to narrow choices, force movement, and shape the ground so other weapons can finish the task. In Ukraine, indirect fire has become the fastest way to turn open terrain into a trap, and crews know that the first rounds are warnings, not the end. At the same time, anti-tank guided missile teams are pushed forward, often working from tree lines, farm buildings, or shallow folds in the land. These teams are trained to wait, because patience increases the chance of catching a tank as it slows or turns. Alongside them, loitering munitions are launched, filling the air with threats that do not need perfect timing. These weapons are cheaper than tanks, easier to deploy, and designed to hunt rather than rush. Once airborne, they extend the battlefield upward, where armor offers fewer guarantees. Drones tie all of this together, acting as eyes that never blink. Small quadcopters and fixed-wing UAVs begin to circle, marking the Challenger's movement and passing coordinates to anyone who can use them. This constant tracking removes uncertainty, and uncertainty is often the last protection a tank has. Open-source analysis from the conflict shows that once a vehicle is tagged by drones, its risk of follow-on attack rises sharply within minutes, especially when operating near known firing lanes. The sky does not need to see perfectly. It only needs to see enough. This shift marks a move away from direct engagement toward layered suppression. Instead of tank versus tank, the fight becomes a system working against a single point. Mortars restrict space, artillery blocks exits, missiles wait for angles, drones watch everything. The goal is not to destroy the Challenger outright at once, but to push it into survival mode, where every action is defensive and every second is spent avoiding the next hit. In that state, even the most capable platform loses initiative. Western tanks draw this kind of response because they threaten balance. Their optics, fire control, and crew protection make them dangerous even in small numbers, so adversaries treat them as problems to be solved, not targets of opportunity. Russian doctrine reflects this reality by prioritizing heavy armor once identified, assigning multiple assets to increase the chance that one succeeds. It is not elegant, but it is practical, and in a war of attrition, practicality often wins ground. There is also an important difference between damaging a tank and forcing it to withdraw. A burned vehicle on camera makes headlines, but a tank that survives under pressure still achieves denial by staying alive and drawing resources. Forcing a crew into constant movement consumes fuel, time, and attention, while tying up weapons that could be used elsewhere. Analysts tracking equipment losses in Ukraine have noted that many tanks classified as damaged were later recovered, repaired, and returned, proving that removal from the fight can be temporary even without full destruction. For the Challenger 2 crew, this moment defines the rest of the engagement. They are no longer choosing targets. They are managing threats. Every sound, every alert, and every change in terrain matters more than the next shot. The tank still has teeth, but it must protect its body first, because staying operational is now the mission. At this stage, firepower alone no longer decides the fight. Movement does. Once exposure is confirmed, survival depends on movement, because in a drone-dominated fight, stillness is the fastest way to disappear. The crew treats mobility as protection, not as an option, and every decision follows that rule. Smoke grenades fire first, not to hide forever but to break the lock, because even a few seconds of lost tracking can reset an enemy attack cycle. The smoke is thick, metallic, and short-lived, yet it interrupts both human eyes and thermal seekers long enough to force missiles and drones to hesitate. With that pause created, the tank begins constant repositioning, sliding from one fold of ground to the next, never staying long enough to be plotted. Reverse slopes become lifelines because they block direct line of sight while still allowing the crew to watch the field from cover. Instead of cresting hills, the vehicle works their backsides, exposing only what must be shown and withdrawing before patterns form. This method does not make the tank invisible, but it makes prediction harder, and prediction is what weapons need most. Static firing positions are avoided for a simple reason. Drones punish routine. Once a tank fires twice from the same spot, its location becomes a memory shared across networks, and memory travels faster than armor can react. Field data from Ukraine shows that vehicles remaining stationary for more than a few minutes after detection face sharply higher strike rates, especially from loitering munitions. Crews know this, so even successful shots trigger movement, not celebration, because the next threat is already searching for the last muzzle flash. Inside the vehicle, coordination becomes constant conversation rather than command. The commander scans ahead and to the flanks. The gunner watches heat signatures for sudden change. The driver reads ground texture and slope. And the loader tracks status while preparing the next round. Each role overlaps slightly with the others, creating redundancy, because losing awareness in one seat can cost everyone. This shared rhythm keeps the tank moving with purpose instead of panic, even when alarms and warnings arrive without order. Stopping is fatal because drones do not get tired, and they do not miss opportunities. A hovering UAV can wait until the perfect angle appears, while a moving target forces constant recalculation. Analysts have noted that many confirmed armor losses occur not during movement but during pauses, when vehicles slow to reassess or reload. In those moments, speed drops, noise settles, and the sky finds what it has been tracking all along. Movement denies that moment. Reading terrain under pressure is a skill learned through repetition, not maps. The crew learns to see subtle dips, soil color changes, and hedge lines as signals, choosing paths that limit exposure even if they add distance. This approach trades speed for survival, because reaching the destination intact matters more than arriving early. Over time, crews internalize these patterns, turning unfamiliar farmland into a language that guides decisions faster than conscious thought. This behavior reflects a wider shift in armored warfare, away from positional defense and toward continuous displacement. Fixed lines once allowed tanks to dominate through presence, but sensors have erased the safety those lines offered. Today, defense is movement, and control comes from denying the enemy a stable picture. Tanks no longer hold ground by standing on it. They influence ground by refusing to be pinned to it. For the crew, this constant motion is exhausting, both physically and mentally, yet it preserves options. Fuel burns faster. Maintenance demands rise. Mistakes still happen. But the alternative is worse, because a stopped tank becomes a reference point, and reference points attract fire. By staying in motion, the crew forces the enemy to spend time, weapons, and attention, all while keeping the vehicle in the fight. Even with perfect movement, modern battlefields do not guarantee clean escapes. The moment that defines survivability is not the shot fired, but the hit absorbed, because modern wars test what happens after contact. a loitering munition drops through thinning smoke and strikes the upper section of the Challenger 2, where many pilots aim when they get a chance. The impact is sharp and violent, loud enough to rattle the crew, yet it does not deliver the clean result attackers hope for. Outside, panels are scarred and fittings are torn, while inside the vehicle keeps its balance and continues to function. External damage is visible, and that matters. But penetration is what decides outcomes, and here there is no confirmed breach. Sensors flicker, alarms speak briefly, and then systems settle back into order. The tank still steers, the gun still tracks, and the crew remains able to act. In Ukraine, analysts have noted that many loitering munitions succeed by causing secondary effects, such as fires or internal overpressure, rather than by punching through thick armor. When those effects fail to cascade, the weapon's value drops sharply, even if the strike looks dramatic from above. What protects the crew in this moment is not luck alone, but design choices made long before the war began. The Challenger 2 reflects a philosophy that treats people as the center of the machine, not as passengers inside it. Ammunition is stored away from the crew, behind armored barriers, reducing the chance that one strike turns into a chain reaction. This separation limits internal fire risk, which has been a leading cause of catastrophic losses in other platforms when penetrated. Data collected from battlefield assessments shows that crew survival rates rise significantly when ammunition cook-off is delayed or prevented, even if the vehicle itself takes damage. Survivability also means control after impact, and control depends on keeping basic functions alive. The Challenger's layout allows the crew to move, check indicators, and respond without fighting their own vehicle. There is space to think, which matters when seconds decide whether to withdraw or re-engage. In contrast, cramped interiors can amplify shock, turning a manageable hit into confusion. Modern crews train for these moments, rehearsing drills that assume damage will happen and that survival depends on disciplined response rather than panic. It is important to stay within what can be verified, because war reporting demands restraint. There is no claim here that the tank is invulnerable, or that it shrugs off every threat. Mines, follow-on strikes, and coordinated attacks have destroyed heavy armor throughout the conflict, including Western-supplied vehicles. The point is narrower and more precise. This specific hit does not end the fight, and that outcome aligns with a design goal focused on keeping crews alive long enough to decide what comes next. The difference between invulnerability and survivability becomes clear under fire. Invulnerability promises that nothing gets through, which is unrealistic in a battlefield saturated with sensors and explosives. Survivability accepts that hits will occur and builds systems to prevent one mistake from becoming the last. Military studies often highlight this distinction, noting that platforms designed to recover from damage maintain operational relevance longer than those optimized only to resist it. In simple terms, a tank that survives keeps shaping the battle, even if it needs repair later. For the crew, this moment shifts confidence without inviting recklessness. They know the vehicle can take punishment, but they also know limits exist. That balance encourages smart risk rather than blind trust, which is essential in environments where threats come from above, ahead, and behind. The tank remains a tool, not a shield of myth, and its value lies in buying options, not in defying physics. The broader lesson reaches beyond one vehicle. Modern armored warfare favors designs that protect trained people, because training takes years while equipment can be replaced. Nations that invest in survivability preserve experience, and experience compounds across battles. When crews live, lessons travel forward, shaping tactics and saving others down the line. Surviving a hit buys time, but time only matters if the threat is removed. The fight turns once eyes move ahead of steel, because tanks survive longer when they are not alone. As pressure builds around the Challenger 2, Ukrainian FPV drones are launched to hunt the most dangerous close threats, especially Russian ATGM teams working from tree lines, farm buildings, and shallow folds in the land. These small aircraft move fast, fly low, and carry just enough payload to end a launch team before it can fire again. Their purpose is simple: remove the killers that thrive at short range and buy the tank room to breathe. This change matters because anti-tank teams are most effective when they force armor to slow or stop. By sending drones forward, the crew pushes danger away from the hull and into space the tank cannot see on its own. Operators guide FPVs through narrow gaps and along hedges, following cables or visual cues that lead back to launch positions. When contact is made, the strike is quick, often against exposed personnel rather than vehicles, which sharply reduces the chance of a second missile entering the fight. Reports from the field show that removing even one ATGM team can cut local threat density in half for several minutes, which is often enough to reset momentum. With immediate dangers reduced, the Challenger 2 regains freedom of action, and that freedom is used deliberately. The tank resumes coordinated fire, not in isolation, but as part of a wider picture shaped by drone feeds and radio updates. Targets now include remaining armored vehicles trying to reposition and support trucks moving along exposed routes. Each shot serves a purpose beyond destruction, because forcing vehicles to halt or turn back breaks rhythm, and rhythm is what keeps units supplied and confident. Logistics become a natural focus once pressure lifts, because supply vehicles are softer targets with outsized impact. Fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, and recovery assets are easier to damage and harder to replace under fire. When these elements pull back or scatter, frontline units lose tempo, even if their combat vehicles remain intact. Analysts tracking engagements in Ukraine note that disrupting logistics often causes effects that last hours or days, while the destruction of a single tank may change little if support remains intact. In this sense, firepower becomes a tool for shaping behavior, not just removing hardware. The deeper lesson is that tanks cannot operate alone in modern combat, no matter how advanced they are. Sensors and weapons now reach beyond the horizon, and threats arrive from angles no turret can cover by itself. Drones extend awareness, acting as scouts, spotters, and strike platforms, all at a fraction of the cost of armored assets. They allow crews to see around corners, over ridges, and behind cover, turning uncertainty into information. That information shortens response time and reduces guesswork, which lowers risk in an environment where guessing is punished. This teaming also changes how commanders think about protection. Instead of relying solely on armor and smoke, they layer defense with distance and disruption. FPVs push danger outward. Surveillance drones watch approaches. Artillery and mortars shape space. The tank becomes one part of a moving system rather than a lone centerpiece. When that system works, each element covers the weaknesses of the others, and no single failure collapses the whole. There is a cascading effect when logistics and movement are disrupted together. Vehicles hesitate. Columns break formation. Drivers choose longer routes or stop entirely. These small delays accumulate, slowing reinforcement and reducing pressure elsewhere on the line. Even without a dramatic explosion, the enemy's plan begins to fray, because coordination depends on timing. By striking supply and support, the Challenger and its partners influence battles they never directly enter. For the crew, this phase feels different from survival. The alarms fade, the rhythm steadies. Decisions shift from immediate danger to deliberate choice. They are still alert, still moving, but no longer reacting to every sound. The tank is once again part of a combined effort, supported by eyes in the sky and teammates beyond the hull. That support does not make the vehicle safe, but it makes the fight manageable. With pressure reduced, the mission shifts from survival to withdrawal. The fight ends without celebration, because the real result is that the Challenger 2 and its crew leave the area intact and still operational. After hours of pressure, strikes from above, and constant tracking, the tank disengages on its own terms, proving that survival, not spectacle, decides value on today's battlefield. There is no inflated victory count here, only a clear outcome. Russian missiles were spent. Russian drones were lost. Russian supply movement slowed. The crew went home ready to fight again. This is where the balance tilts against Russia. Modern war no longer rewards throwing more steel into the fight if trained people do not come back. Mobility, coordination with drones, and protection of crews now shape effectiveness, while raw firepower alone keeps failing to deliver control. Every Russian strike that does not finish the job becomes a cost with no return. If future wars are decided by who protects skilled people longer, not who destroys more machines, then real strength looks very different. If you value clear analysis like this, subscribe to Military Force for more deep, honest coverage of modern warfare.